This is not a devlog. This is a devlog.
Oh, let's make some indie games. I love making games. Whoa, I'm a log. I'm made out of wood.
I mean, dad jokes aside, this is a devlog, sort of. It's gonna be me talking about me making a game, which is a devlog, I guess. And I might never even finish the game that I show you during these devlogs, because the purpose of these devlogs is not to market a game that I'm making, but to use my process of making a game to just talk about making games, because ultimately this is a channel about making games. I made games for a long time, but mostly as a professional game designer where I'm working in a team and someone else programs or someone else writes the story, someone else does the art and so on and so on. So, you know, I've had a very specialized role of just writing documents and pitching ideas and stuff like that. But I do occasionally make games in my spare time, and this log is going to be a place for me to talk about that. Some of what I talk about may be stuff that resonates with you if you are making games yourself. Some of it just might give you new perspectives.
And some of it might just make you think, this fella don't know what he's talking about. I'm never watching his YouTube channel ever again.
Can you perhaps not undermine me like that? Thanks. This is a project I've been working on for a few weeks.
Oh no, not another pixel art game.
I haven't spent loads of time on it. I've been doing it in little bursts of a couple of hours at a time on streams and so on. But I've been using it to try out a mashup of mechanics that I haven't seen in a game before and I think is interesting. So what you see here might look really simple and the art style is a bit cruddy, and I've based it on a hack of someone else's project as well, so I didn't even code this 100% from scratch. But I am having a lot of fun with it, and I'm sort of doing some interesting experiments with ideas. So let me talk you through what I'm doing here. And we're going to focus on how I got to where I am with it, and the ideation process, and how sort of fiddling around with a prototype gives you ideas for other things you could do and other directions you could go in. So what I'm going to do in this video is I'm going to show you the game, but I'm also going to build a little project timeline, not to plan the project, but to talk about what's happened so far. And we're going to be doing that in a piece of software called Miro. Unfortunately, it doesn't have a night mode, which is a shame. I searched to see if this had a night mode so that we wouldn't blind ourselves, and this commenter said, I want to enable dark mode on the Miro desktop app. How do I do that? I require of dark mode, otherwise my eyes will proceed to hurt. I know how you feel. I'm going to create a timeline on Miro with, here's the game. Over on the right, where I come from, time moves from left to right. The working title of this game at the moment, which I'm definitely not set on, but it just is evocative and I quite like it. Dirt World. I'm sure there's already a game called Dirt World. It's probably like a motorbike game or something. And I will show you the game, but I'm going to show you it in stages so you can see how I got there. And before I even did anything in this game, I think it's fair to give an honorable shout out to Spelunky. I read the book about the development of Spelunky by Derek Yu for our new podcast, The Game Developers Library. And this kind of got me thinking about platformers generally. And I know some of you will be thinking, not another indie game platformer. Platformer is really just a camera angle and a way of controlling a character. And there are so many different subgenres of platformer that are just fundamentally different games. Platformers are a genre that I feel very neutral on, but Spelunky is one that I love a lot. And I thought a lot about why this is, and we'll get to that in a minute. I thought I'm going to start a new project in Game Maker. And before I talk too much about Game Maker, one thing I need to say about this whole devlog is I do not really care about game engines. I use Game Maker because it's the game engine I've used the most, and I can do things in it very quickly. If you have strong opinions about how I should learn to use something else, please bear in mind that in order to get to the level of proficiency that I am now in Game Maker, in Godot or Unreal or Unity, it would probably take me another 2 or 3 years. So if you want to have a conversation about game engines in the comments, go ahead. But you're not going to convert me because I'm using the tool that I am the fastest with rather than the tool that is objectively best to make games with. So all of that out of the way to start with. I wanted to grab an existing project that I could just sort of hack away at and tweak and change and basically not have to do everything from scratch, because I've started that process so many times and it's quite tedious. Basically, I found like 4 or 5 different platformer projects that were templates that were supposed to be learning templates, and quite a few of them weren't very good. For example, the game was built all around a specific size grid, and if you changed the size of anything, all of the code broke. Weirdly enough, the project I ended up finding to modify for the game I'm now working on had a bunch of other things about it that made it kind of easier for me to modify, and that was B-Bush's ZX Spectrum adventure game template. So some of you will recognize this as being a rip-off Dizzy the Egg, a popular series of games in the 80s and early 90s. And this project, when I dug into it and started messing around with it, just had really well-structured code and was a lot easier to hack and tweak than other ones, which is strange because it's doing so much to sort of make it look like a Spectrum game from 1984 or something. And I've also got to give a shout out to the dev from Night of the Abattoir Man, which was a game that I had on the channel recently. Is another game that uses this ZX Spectrum type aesthetic, and they basically stuck with the original colors that were available and used each color for like one specific mechanic in the game. So it's very easy to read the game, and it becomes like less of a doing retro for the sake of retro and more doing retro with a purpose. So I think, you know, stumbling across this ZX Spectrum styled demo game that I could hack, and having recently played a Spectrum style game, did like the idea in these old games that sprites are just one color. That really helps you to just glance at the screen and see exactly what's happening very quickly, because colors are used very, very sparingly and just for one thing at a time. You can see here one of my very early hacks of the game, and it doesn't run because I broke it. And you can already see here that I've sort of hacked the Dizzy Egg character to look a bit like a knight. I left this weird little goatee, and there's a mouth on their stomach. When they jump, the mouth opens in their stomach, which is quite disturbing. In the demo project, when you go out to an object and you interact with it, it would bring up an interface of like an inventory of 3 items and put the object in there, and that was how these Dizzy Egg adventure games worked. Like a character would go, I want a cupcake, and you'd go and get the cupcake and bring it to them. And I didn't really want to use it for that. I wanted to use it for doing something action oriented like Spelunky. So I stripped a lot of that out. And then the first thing I did to test myself, bearing in mind I haven't done a lot of programming in the last couple of years, I wanted to make the behavior where the character could pick up an item above their head and run around with it and then eventually throw it. And this is something that Spelunky has, and it's also something that like old school Mario has. You know, looking at this, I thought, I'm not going to stick to these authentic ZX Spectrum color palette. I'm not doing like a ZX Spectrum fan game or anything like that. I'm just using that resolution and certain aspects of the art style. So I don't need to keep exactly the same colors, but I do want to stick to that rule of using one color per object, at least to start out with, because I think what that will do is allow me to iterate quicker on the art, because I'm not having to think about, you know, every object has 4 colors in it and loads of shading. Keeping it simple so that I can iterate faster. If this game accidentally becomes a good game that I want to spend more time on, I can go back and spend more time on the art using an art style that is very minimalist and has these very strict rules about the size of things and how many colors each thing can have, i.e. 1. And then later on, if the project grows and the gameplay is interesting enough to warrant it, then I might do another pass on the art and make it more interesting. And then you might ask why I made the character into a knight. Well, I had some very, very loose ideas about world building, and they're very, very loose. But the reason we've got a knight here is basically I did some daydreaming, and I was thinking about like a fantasy setting where we've got like a post-apocalyptic real world, and it has medieval fantasy stuff in it, but we're not like 100 years into the future. We're thousands and thousands of years into the future, and like mankind has probably fallen all the way down to the Bronze Age and is climbing back up again. And then we have like knights and wizards and stuff within that. And I did this piece of concept art on Procreate. This wasn't specifically for the platformer we're talking about today, but I thought it was conceptually quite cool. So this is just created as a composite of these 2 photographs. This is Tower Bridge from London. This is someone's knight. I don't know. Sorry, I stole your knight for my concept art. I'm not going to put it in the game, so don't worry. This was me learning how to do certain things on Procreate, which is an iPad app that you can draw on with a pencil. And I was thinking of certain Miyazaki films. You've got a modern city that's overgrown, and then you've got what looks like a kind of fuzzy, gross fungus thing all over this big landmark, which I think is probably quite inspired by various Ghibli films, but particularly the forest from Nausicaa, I don't know, sort of lives rent-free in my mind. It's fantasy, but it's science fantasy. It's not quite science fiction. I was also listening to a podcast about Book of the New Sun. Like, this kind of imagery here is quite cool. Look at him, that's cool. Edgelord incel from the future is not as cool as he looks. Was listening to a lot of Witchbolt, who is a synth artist. It's like black metal adjacent ambient synth music that sounds like it's from some haunted video game. But this is all the stuff I was thinking about. I think another thing that really belongs on my reference mood board is stuff like this. These are Mighty Max toys, but basically just this style of toy from the early 90s where everything is slightly gross colors. I was really thinking about this in relation to my game art. My game art is going to stay very, very simple for a long time because there's no point in me sinking loads of time into making it really pretty before I know that the game works. But I can at least think about things like the color of things. So I've got this dull lilac color is the stone of my world. I'm trying to avoid using grey if I can. Up there, that's supposed to be a car. I've got some little clutter objects that spawn randomly, and sometimes they get stuck in walls, but I don't really mind that being stuck in a wall because it sort of looks like it's jutting out. I was thinking about these things at the same time. I was thinking about feudal or magical knights in a post-apocalyptic setting, and I think that's why I made this guy a knight. Fungus Forest from Nausicaa and stuff like Roger Dean, stuff like what's his name? These paintings by Max Ernst. You know, if you look at this little strip of influences, I like my dark psychedelia. I love an apocalypse with mushrooms in it, like The Last of Us or Caelid in Elden Ring. And all of this is feeding into this little guy, which is me thinking, okay, I'm going to use this very simple art style that comes with the project. Very, very low resolution. I'll just make him a knight for now, and then maybe I can start thinking about putting this knight in an environment that has this weird mix of broken futuristic city and horrible mushroom growths and stuff like that. So this strip here is like my creative direction mood board for this project in my head. This might not be what I want the game to look like because, quite frankly, I can't achieve anything like that, but it is what I'm thinking in terms of the setting and the general fantasy of it. Beautiful but creepy, and just this weird mix of fantasy and sci-fi. And then if we go back to our mechanical influences, I'm thinking of what's something unusual I can do with a platformer.
I don't think it's really fair to call this a process. It seems completely incoherent to me. You're just doing things you like and following whims.
Well, yeah, arguably that is what creativity is.
But why are you so invested in trying to do weird things and making things that are original and stuff like that? Why can't you just make a good game?
Well, as you've seen, I'm not the greatest programmer in the world, and I can't make brilliant art either, so there's no point me just making a game in a popular genre and trying to like compete with high indie studios that have 30 people working in them when they've got like dedicated artists and stuff. I can't compete on the basis of quality and polish, so I need to compete on making something interesting and different.
Yeah, but what if you're just being different for the sake of it and what you make isn't actually fun?
That's literally the entire point of prototyping a game, is to try and find that out, is to test whether the idea is fun. That's why I'm just testing the unique stuff and I'm not putting in any mechanics that I already know are fun.
So in order to find a new type of fun, you have to do things that you think might not be fun. Because if you spend the time implementing the things that you already know are fun, you're not going to end up with anything new.
That's kind of what I'm getting at, yeah. If I spend all my time making my little knight do sword fighting, I already know that's fun. So if I test my original part of my idea first, and that's fun, then I can add the other tried and tested fun things to it later on. So here's some screen grab footage I took right at the start of the project, and you can see the weird mouth on the to stomach. But you can also see I've got that pick up and throw mechanic working with the objects. That pink thing is supposed to be a cupcake. You can pick it up by pressing down and action, and then you can throw it forward by pressing action. You can throw it up by pressing up and action, and if you press down and action, then it's dropped. So you can sort of drop things off the ledge. And in this version, there's like a fragility to objects, so if they hit a wall or smash against a wall too many times, they break. I haven't really achieved much with what you can see here, but I have taken it away from the dizzy egg, talk to characters, read signs thing, and got like something closer to what we get in Spelunky with the basic interactions with objects, which is mechanically where I wanted to start from, because I wasn't necessarily interested in making like a very tight action platformer. I had a loose idea that I wanted to make something environmental where we've got a strange world and you can pick something up in one part of that world and take it to another part and then use it. You know, examples in Spelunky would be there is an altar and you can take items to it and sacrifice them on the altar and get treasure and stuff like that. I wanted to make something that had lots of little interactions based on only being able to carry one item above your little head at all times. So if we go back to our timeline, at this stage you can see there's not really much of a relationship between the game mechanic of being a little guy that picks stuff up and carries it around and this stuff, this kind of world buildy stuff. Got to the point where I could pick stuff up and throw it around. I didn't do anything with it for a little while, and part of the reason why I didn't do anything with it for a little while, I was busy playing the Blueprints. And Blueprints has a really cool idea in it that I think we're going to see in a lot more games coming up, and that is drafting as a core mechanic. Now, Blueprints is a puzzle game, and if you haven't played it, it's like these very hard old PC puzzle games that we used to get in the 90s, things like Myst and stuff like that. But it is kind of built as you go by laying these tiles. So it functions sort of like a board game where you're building the board by putting the rooms down, but then as a character you're walking into the rooms and they're 3D. So you've got this idea of drafting rooms, which comes from games like Carcassonne and the Castles of Mad King Ludwig. And we see it in some video games as well, like Aramis's Hexagod is a drafting game, right? The main mechanic you're doing in that is getting little tiles and putting them on a grid. I find something very satisfying about that mechanic. I also just generally like choices in games where it's like, pick one of these three things, and you're picking which one to use at that moment in time, so you have to have situational awareness about which is a good choice at this moment. It's not just like a loot game where certain things are just always good to have because number go up. It's much more about reading the board and going, you know, I should get the storeroom now because I really need a key. So I was playing Blueprints and I was admiring it. I was thinking about how much I like drafting in games and how I'd like to see more games where drafting is the core mechanic. And then I had the slightly bizarre idea of, you know, what if I could turn my platformer prototype into a platformer where you drafted rooms, which long-time followers of this channel will find very funny and ironic, because I am so often saying that you cannot just mash together random things you like and hope to get a good game out of it. You have to think hard about what those things achieve when you put them together. But this was such a weird mix of things, I just had to try it because there's no way of knowing what these things would feel like together unless I did them. So at this point, I returned to my platformer prototype, and previously I'd got the kind of picking up and throwing working. I started to experiment with the idea of gross fungus in the game. I'd even got like a switch and door mechanic in place where, you know, you could even throw things at a switch to trigger it and stuff like that. But this all felt like very standard platformer stuff and not anything that I really needed to test out. And this is perhaps a good time to reiterate something I've been saying a lot recently on the channel, which is there's a difference between prototyping to test game mechanics and building a learning project. And don't get me wrong, a game you're working on could be both of these things. But sometimes you are building something to check that you can make it. It's feasibility testing, testing your own ability to be able to make the thing you want to make. Whereas gameplay prototyping is much more, you can make the thing you want to make, but you need to make it in order to see if it's fun. And the problem with where I'd got to with my first set of prototype mechanics is that none of them were particularly new. These mechanics are basically just stuff you would see in Spelunky or Rogue Legacy or any modern puzzle platformer type thing. So it wasn't really anything for me to get excited about as something unique or unusual. As soon as I got the idea of the drafting platformer, then I started to think, well, I might be onto something here, and it could be terrible and it might not work, but I need to test the idea because it could actually be something really unusual and unique. So I started to test out this mechanic where you could go up to a door in the world and drag and drop a shape and it would draw a floor. For that to have meaning, you would need different types of rooms. So you open up a door and then there are different rooms with names. We can have a red room that you usually don't want to get. We can have maybe a technology-based room and a nature-based room, and these different rooms will have different types of things spawn in them. So you can see here very early footage of me testing this idea out and just getting the basic interface in place for building something. And you can see at the moment they all kind of build on top of each other, and it's not going to be a very fun game because we just go down and get stuck and can't get back up again. Here's one that is a little bit more developed. So each room is now on a grid, and you get like a small square room or longer rectangular rooms, which are two of the same size. And you can kind of loop back under yourself and build towers up into previous rooms. And then sometimes that gives you a way to jump back up. It's quite hard to make these kind of jumps where you bump your head. It's obviously not a game because there's no fail state, there's no goal or anything like that. But I know that people like collecting coins. I know that a game feels more exciting if there's a chance you might die. I know that in the long term, if I want a game to have a sense of reward and a sense of peril, those are mechanics that I might add to it. But I wanted to focus as much as I could on prototyping the mechanic that I was unsure of, because it's weird and it needs testing. So every time I sit down and work on this for 2 or 3 hours, every time I spend that time implementing a game mechanic that I know will work, that's not a good use of my time for experimenting. I know that combat will make the game more exciting, for example, but I have no intention of adding that yet. And then I felt like I needed to start making the room names have a meaning. I started off with 3 categories of room, really. There's green rooms, which are nature-based rooms and give you resources. There are monster rooms, which are called lairs, which have that kind of horrible fungal quality that we talked about. Can't quite tell whether they're made of fungus or meat, but I like the ambiguity. And then this sort of grey purple is meant to be stone or metal, and these are our kind of post-apocalyptic ruin type buildings. And there's a cool interaction here that I built on a stream, which is there's this monster on the floor, and you can see that in this room the doors are kind of covered in tentacles, and after you feed the monster they become unblocked. So yeah, I really just got to a stage where I needed to start making the different room types feel unique. So you might have a different reason to go in each one. There could be like a witch's cauldron in a room, and you drop 2 different things in it and you get a different type of potion. Lots of interactions that I can do with carrying an item and dropping it into a thing. So my goals with this really are to just experiment with that and find out interesting combinations of those things. But I do feel like the basic activity of running around, finding a door, building a room, and gradually building out this platformer level, it does feel quite fun. It's very gridded, so it feels more like a Metroidvania where you're in a castle rather than like a platformer that's about trying not to fall down holes. But I do think as this develops, I might start to add things like trap blocks that fall down and all of that kind of stuff. Coming back to the idea of trying to make sure you focus on the concept you're testing, if my general idea is what happens when we put a platformer in a drafting game, then I need to think about how do I make the choice of rooms feel significant. Because the choice of rooms in the blueprints, it might be that you choose a room based on right now needs of like what resource you need. You need coins, or you need gems, or you need a key. So you choose the room that's going to have that thing in it. That's one type of choice. There's also longer term choices of trying to get this set of rooms or trying to uncover this secret or whatever. So in order for that drafting mechanic to translate over into another sort of game, it still needs to encourage that type of thinking. Yeah, I've got the interface in place and I can can place rooms and they have different stuff in, but it's not really a strategic choice where I'm really thinking about why I'm placing the particular room. Hopefully you found that interesting. I'll be doing these intermittently when I feel like it and I've got something new to talk about. Like I said at the start, it's not an exercise in me trying to sell you a game. If I accidentally make a good game and it gets wishlist, then that's great, but it's not the goal here. And future episodes of This Is Not a Devlog may not be about this game. They might be about some other project I do, because I enjoy experimenting, and to my own detriment, and that's why I've never put out a commercial game, just loads of little prototypes that are on my itch page. And part of that is because I was doing game design as a day job and, you know, never had the drive to finish any of my prototypes or turn them into something that people could buy, because I was already kind of getting paid to make games or teach about games or something like that. So very different position from lots of you, but I hope you can learn something from this. And if you've got any queries or questions or things you want me to talk about or discuss, then let me know, and maybe I'll pay attention and answer. I don't know, I'm just a little knight jumping around in a mushroom world.
Thank you to the patrons. You have enabled this thing to exist. Thank you to the patrons. Why put your name on this list? Thank you to the patrons. Your donations show that you can. Thank you to the patrons. We got some more robots, may you be spared.